the new God of righteousness, the new gods of righteousness, the new God of righteousness, the new goddess of righteousness, the new goddesses of righteousness, the new goddess of righteousness, the old God of righteousness, the old gods of righteousness, the old God of righteousness, the old goddess of righteousness, the old goddesses of righteousness, the old goddess of righteousness, the greater God of righteousness, the greater gods of righteousness, the greater God of righteousness, the greater goddess of righteousness, the greater goddesses of righteousness, the greater goddess of righteousness, the lesser God of righteousness, the lesser gods of righteousness, the lesser God of righteousness, the lesser goddess of righteousness, the lesser goddesses of righteousness, the lesser goddess of righteousness, the higher God of righteousness, the higher gods of righteousness, the higher God of righteousness, the higher goddess of righteousness, the higher goddesses of righteousness, the higher goddess of righteousness, the lower God of righteousness, the lower gods of righteousness, the lower God of righteousness, the lower goddess of righteousness, the lower goddesses of righteousness, the lower goddess of righteousness, the greater spirit of righteousness, the greater spirits of righteousness, the greater spirit of righteousness, the lesser spirit of righteousness, the lesser spirits of righteousness, the lesser spirit of righteousness, the higher spirit of righteousness, the higher spirits of righteousness, the higher spirit of righteousness, the lower spirit of righteousness, the lower spirits of righteousness, the lower spirit of righteousness, the major God of righteousness, the major gods of righteousness, the major God of righteousness, the major goddess of righteousness, the major goddesses of righteousness, the major goddess of righteousness, the minor God of righteousness, the minor gods of righteousness, the minor God of righteousness, the minor goddess of righteousness, the minor goddesses of righteousness, the minor goddess of righteousness, the superior God of righteousness, the superior gods of righteousness, the superior God of righteousness, the superior goddess of righteousness, the superior goddesses of righteousness, the superior goddess of righteousness, the inferior God of righteousness, the inferior gods of righteousness, the inferior God of righteousness, the inferior goddess of righteousness, the inferior goddesses of righteousness, the inferior goddess of righteousness, the ancestor God of righteousness, the ancestor gods of righteousness, the ancestor God of righteousness, the ancestor goddess of righteousness, the ancestor goddesses of righteousness, the ancestor goddess of righteousness, the ascendant God of righteousness, the ascendant gods of righteousness, the ascendant God of righteousness, the ascendant goddess of righteousness, the ascendant goddesses of righteousness, the ascendant goddess of righteousness, the descendant God of righteousness, the descendant gods of righteousness, the descendant God of righteousness, the descendant goddess of righteousness, the descendant goddesses of righteousness, the descendant goddess of righteousness, the transcendent God of righteousness, the transcendent gods of righteousness, the transcendent God of righteousness, the transcendent goddess of righteousness, the transcendent goddesses of righteousness, the transcendent goddess of righteousness, the past God of righteousness, the past gods of righteousness, the past God of righteousness, the past goddess of righteousness, the past goddesses of righteousness, the past goddess of righteousness, the present God of righteousness, the present gods of righteousness, the present God of righteousness, the present goddess of righteousness, the present goddesses of righteousness, the present goddess of righteousness, the future God of righteousness, the future gods of righteousness, the future God of righteousness, the future goddess of righteousness, the future goddesses of righteousness, the future goddess of righteousness, the authentic God of righteousness, the authentic gods of righteousness, the authentic God of righteousness, the authentic goddess of righteousness, the authentic goddesses of righteousness, the authentic goddess of righteousness, the synthetic God of righteousness, the synthetic gods of righteousness, the synthetic God of righteousness, the synthetic goddess of righteousness, The synthetic goddesses of righteousness. The synthetic goddess of righteousness. The progressive god of righteousness. The progressive gods of righteousness. The progressive god of righteousness. The progressive goddess of righteousness. The progressive goddesses of righteousness. The progressive goddess of righteousness. The regressive god of righteousness. The regressive gods of righteousness. The regressive god of righteousness. The regressive goddess of righteousness. The regressive goddesses of righteousness. The regressive goddess of righteousness. The ordinary god of righteousness. The ordinary gods of righteousness. The ordinary god of righteousness. The ordinary goddess of righteousness. The ordinary goddesses of righteousness. The ordinary goddess of righteousness. The extraordinary god of righteousness. The extraordinary gods of righteousness. The extraordinary god of righteousness. The extraordinary goddess of righteousness. The extraordinary goddesses of righteousness. The extraordinary goddess of righteousness. The static god of righteousness. The static gods of righteousness. The static god of righteousness. The static goddess of righteousness. The static goddesses of righteousness. The static goddess of righteousness. The dynamic god of righteousness. The dynamic gods of righteousness. The dynamic god of righteousness. The dynamic goddess of righteousness. The dynamic goddesses of righteousness. The dynamic goddess of righteousness. The land god of righteousness. The land gods of righteousness. The land god of righteousness. The land goddess of righteousness. The land goddesses of righteousness. The land goddess of righteousness. The sea god of righteousness. The sea gods of righteousness. The sea god of righteousness. The sea goddess of righteousness. The sea goddesses of righteousness. The sea goddess of righteousness. The sky god of righteousness. The sky gods of righteousness. The sky god of righteousness. The sky goddess of righteousness. The sky goddesses of righteousness. The sky goddess of righteousness. The god of righteousness. The gods of righteousness. The god of righteousness. The goddess of righteousness. The goddesses of righteousness. The goddess of righteousness. The half god of righteousness. The half gods of righteousness. The half god of righteousness. The half goddess of righteousness. The half goddesses of righteousness. The half goddess of righteousness. The vessel of righteousness. The vessels of righteousness. The vessel of righteousness. The name of righteousness. The names of righteousness. The name of righteousness. The person of righteousness. The persons of righteousness. The person of righteousness. The persona of righteousness. The personas of righteousness. The persona of righteousness. The personage of righteousness. The personages of righteousness. The personage of righteousness. The personality of righteousness. The personalities of righteousness. The personality of righteousness. The personification of righteousness. The personifications of righteousness. The personification of righteousness. The image of righteousness. The images of righteousness. The image of righteousness. The imagination of righteousness. The imaginations of righteousness. The imagination of righteousness. The belief of righteousness. The beliefs of righteousness. The belief of righteousness. The thought of righteousness. The thoughts of righteousness. The thought of righteousness. The word of righteousness. The words of righteousness. The word of righteousness. The action of righteousness. The actions of righteousness. The action of righteousness. The reaction of righteousness. The reactions of righteousness. The reaction of righteousness. The feeling of righteousness. The feelings of righteousness. The feeling of righteousness. The situation of righteousness. The situations of righteousness. The situation of righteousness. The circumstance of righteousness. The circumstances of righteousness. The circumstance of righteousness. The environment of righteousness. The environments of righteousness. The environment of righteousness. The relationship of righteousness. The relationships of righteousness. The relationship of righteousness. The number of righteousness. The numbers of righteousness. The number of righteousness. The formula of righteousness. The formulas of righteousness. The formula of righteousness. The equation of righteousness. The equations of righteousness. The equation of righteousness. The theory of righteousness. The theories of righteousness. The theory of righteousness. The symbol of righteousness. The symbols of righteousness. The symbol of righteousness. The color of righteousness. The colors of righteousness. The color of righteousness. The thing of righteousness. The things of righteousness. The thing of righteousness. The way of righteousness. The ways of righteousness. The way of righteousness. The place of righteousness. The places of righteousness. The place of righteousness. The time of righteousness. The times of righteousness. The time of righteousness. The event of righteousness. The events of righteousness. The event of righteousness. The result of righteousness. The results of righteousness. The result of righteousness. The crown of righteousness. The crowns of righteousness. The crown of righteousness. The throne of righteousness. The thrones of righteousness. The throne of righteousness. The righteousness king. The righteousness kings. The righteousness kingdom. The righteousness kingdoms. The righteousness king's subject. The righteousness king's subjects. The righteousness king's dominion. The righteousness king's dominions. The kingdom of righteousness. The kingdoms of righteousness. The kingdom of righteousness. The righteousness queen. The righteousness queens. The righteousness queendom. The righteousness queendoms. The righteousness queen's subject. The righteousness queen's subjects. The righteousness queen's dominion. The righteousness queen's dominions. The queendom of righteousness. The queendoms of righteousness. The queendom of righteousness. The righteousness prince. The righteousness princes. The righteousness princedom. The righteousness princedoms. The righteousness prince's subject. The righteousness prince's subjects. The righteousness prince's dominion. The righteousness prince's dominions. The princedom of righteousness. The princedoms of righteousness. The princedom of righteousness. The righteousness princess. The righteousness princesses. The righteousness princessdom. The righteousness princessdoms. The righteousness princess's subject. The righteousness princess's subjects. The righteousness princess's dominion. The righteousness princess's dominions. The princessdom of righteousness. The princessdoms of righteousness. The princessdom of righteousness. The Lord of righteousness. The lords of righteousness. The Lord of righteousness. The lordess of righteousness. The lordesses of righteousness. The lordess of righteousness. The priest of righteousness. The priests of righteousness. The priest of righteousness. The priestess of righteousness. The priestesses of righteousness. The priestess of righteousness. The ritual of righteousness. The rituals of righteousness. The ritual of righteousness. The shrine of righteousness. The shrines of righteousness. The shrine of righteousness. The temple of righteousness. The temples of righteousness. The temple of righteousness. The leader of righteousness. The leaders of righteousness. The leader of righteousness. The follower of righteousness. The followers of righteousness. The follower of righteousness. The natural substance of righteousness. The natural substances of righteousness. The natural substance of righteousness. The supernatural substance of righteousness. The supernatural substances of righteousness. The supernatural substance of righteousness. The temporal substance of righteousness. The temporal substances of righteousness. The temporal substance of righteousness. The spiritual substance of righteousness. The spiritual substances of righteousness. The spiritual substance of righteousness. The natural form of righteousness. The natural forms of righteousness. The natural form of righteousness. The supernatural form of righteousness. The supernatural forms of righteousness. The supernatural form of righteousness. The temporal form of righteousness. The temporal forms of righteousness. The temporal form of righteousness. The spiritual form of righteousness. The spiritual forms of righteousness. The spiritual form of righteousness. The age of righteousness. The ages of righteousness. The age of righteousness. The era of righteousness. The heiress of righteousness. The era of righteousness. The awakener of righteousness. The awakeners of righteousness. the awakener of righteousness, the awakening of righteousness, the awakenings of righteousness, the awakening of righteousness, the realm of righteousness, the realms of righteousness, the realm of righteousness, the dimension of righteousness, the dimensions of righteousness, the dimension of righteousness, the zone of righteousness, the zones of righteousness, the zone of righteousness, the frequency of righteousness, the frequencies of righteousness, the frequency of righteousness, the century of righteousness, the centuries of righteousness, the century of righteousness, the millennium of righteousness, the millenniums of righteousness, the millennium of righteousness, the purpose of righteousness, the purposes of righteousness, the purpose of righteousness, the meaning of righteousness, the meanings of righteousness, the meaning of righteousness, the culture of righteousness, the cultures of righteousness, the culture of righteousness, the demonstrator of righteousness, the demonstrators of righteousness, the demonstrator of righteousness, the demonstration of righteousness, the demonstrations of righteousness, the demonstration of righteousness, the manifester of righteousness, the manifestors of righteousness, the manifester of righteousness, the manifestation of righteousness, the manifestations of righteousness, the manifestation of righteousness, the presence of righteousness, the presences of righteousness, the presence of righteousness, the glow of righteousness, the glows of righteousness, the glow of righteousness, the goal of righteousness, the goals of righteousness, the goal of righteousness, the plan of righteousness, the plans of righteousness, the plan of righteousness, the book of righteousness, the books of righteousness, the book of righteousness, the philosopher of righteousness, the philosophers of righteousness, the philosopher of righteousness, the philosophy of righteousness, the philosophies of righteousness, the philosophy of righteousness, the releaser of righteousness, the releasers of righteousness, the releaser of righteousness, the release of righteousness, the releases of righteousness, the release of righteousness, the variable of righteousness, the variables of righteousness, the variable of righteousness, the cause of righteousness, the causes of righteousness, the cause of righteousness, the effect of righteousness, the effects of righteousness, the effect of righteousness, the journey of righteousness, the journeys of righteousness, the journey of righteousness, the emergence of righteousness, the emergences of righteousness, the emergence of righteousness, the source of righteousness, the sources of righteousness, the source of righteousness, the originator of righteousness, the originators of righteousness, the originator of righteousness, the origin of righteousness, the origins of righteousness, the origin of righteousness, the forefather of righteousness, the forefathers of righteousness, the forefather of righteousness, the foremother of righteousness, the foremothers of righteousness, the foremother of righteousness, the ancestor of righteousness, the ancestors of righteousness, the ancestor of righteousness, the descendant of righteousness, the descendants of righteousness, the descendant of righteousness, the lineage of righteousness, the lineages of righteousness, the lineage of righteousness, the heritage of righteousness, the heritages of righteousness, the heritage of righteousness, the heir of righteousness, the heirs of righteousness, the heir of righteousness, the co-heir of righteousness, the co-heirs of righteousness, the co-heir of righteousness, the joint heir of righteousness, the joint heirs of righteousness, the joint heir of righteousness, the dynasty of righteousness, the dynasties of righteousness, the dynasty of righteousness, the force of righteousness, the forces of righteousness, the force of righteousness, the law of righteousness, the laws of righteousness, the law of righteousness, the pact of righteousness, the pacts of righteousness, the pact of righteousness, the game of righteousness, the games of righteousness, the game of righteousness, the mask of righteousness, the masks of righteousness, the mask of righteousness, the armor of righteousness, the armors of righteousness, the armor of righteousness, the sword of righteousness, the swords of righteousness, the sword of righteousness, the shield of righteousness, the shields of righteousness, the shield of righteousness, the force shield of righteousness, the force shields of righteousness, the force shield of righteousness, the armored force shield of righteousness, the armored force shields of righteousness, the armored force shield of righteousness, the champion of righteousness, the champions of righteousness, the champion of righteousness, the guardian of righteousness, the guardians of righteousness, the guardian of righteousness, the defender of righteousness, the defenders of righteousness, the defender of righteousness, the protector of righteousness, the protectors of righteousness, the protector of righteousness, the chant of righteousness, the chants of righteousness, the chant of righteousness, the shape of righteousness, the shapes of righteousness, the shape of righteousness, the cube of righteousness, the cubes of righteousness, the cube of righteousness, the cuboid of righteousness, the cuboids of righteousness, the cuboid of righteousness, the sphere of righteousness, the spheres of righteousness, the sphere of righteousness, the spheroid of righteousness, the spheroids of righteousness, the spheroid of righteousness, the prism of righteousness, the prisms of righteousness, the prism of righteousness, the pyramid of righteousness, the pyramids of righteousness, the pyramid of righteousness, the cylinder of righteousness, the cylinders of righteousness, the cylinder of righteousness, the cone of righteousness, the cones of righteousness, the cone of righteousness, the triangle of righteousness, the triangles of righteousness, the triangle of righteousness, the circle of righteousness, the circles of righteousness, the circle of righteousness, the semicircle of righteousness, the semicircles of righteousness, the semicircle of righteousness, the square of righteousness, the squares of righteousness, the square of righteousness, the rectangle of righteousness, the rectangles of righteousness, the rectangle of righteousness, the parallelogram of righteousness, the parallelograms of righteousness, the parallelogram of righteousness, the rhombus of righteousness, the rhombuses of righteousness, the rhombus of righteousness, the trapezoid of righteousness, the trapezoids of righteousness, the trapezoid of righteousness, the polygon of righteousness, the polygons of righteousness, the polygon of righteousness, the pentagon of righteousness, the pentagons of righteousness, the pentagon of righteousness, the hexagon of righteousness, the hexagons of righteousness, the hexagon of righteousness, the septagon of righteousness, the septagons of righteousness, the septagon of righteousness, the octagon of righteousness, the octagons of righteousness, the octagon of righteousness, the nonagon of righteousness, the nonagons of righteousness, the nonagon of righteousness, the decagon of righteousness, the decagons of righteousness, the decagon of righteousness, the evolution of righteousness, the evolutions of righteousness, the evolution of righteousness, the revolution of righteousness, the revolutions of righteousness, the revolution of righteousness, the elemental art of righteousness, the elemental arts of righteousness, the elemental art of righteousness, the elemental science of righteousness, the elemental sciences of righteousness, the elemental science of righteousness, the elemental principle of righteousness, the elemental principles of righteousness, the elemental principle of righteousness, the elemental technology of righteousness, the elemental technologies of righteousness, the elemental technology of righteousness, the low elemental art of righteousness, the low elemental arts of righteousness, the low elemental art of righteousness, the low elemental science of righteousness, the low elemental sciences of righteousness, the low elemental science of righteousness, the low elemental principle of righteousness, the low elemental principles of righteousness, the low elemental principle of righteousness, the low elemental technology of righteousness, the low elemental technologies of righteousness, the low elemental technology of righteousness, the high elemental art of righteousness, the high elemental arts of righteousness, the high elemental art of righteousness, the high elemental science of righteousness, the high elemental sciences of righteousness, the high elemental science of righteousness, the high elemental principle of righteousness, the high elemental principles of righteousness, the high elemental principle of righteousness, the high elemental technology of righteousness, the high elemental technologies of righteousness, the high elemental technology of righteousness, the agent of righteousness, the agents of righteousness, the agent of righteousness, the agency of righteousness, the agencies of righteousness, the agency of righteousness, the amplifier of righteousness, the amplifiers of righteousness, the amplifier of righteousness, the amplification of righteousness, the amplifications of righteousness, the amplification of righteousness, the enhancer of righteousness, the enhancers of righteousness, the enhancer of righteousness, the enhancement of righteousness, the enhancements of righteousness, the enhancement of righteousness, the magnifier of righteousness, the magnifiers of righteousness, the magnifier of righteousness, the magnification of righteousness, the magnifications of righteousness, the magnification of righteousness, the influencer of righteousness, the influencers of righteousness, the influencer of righteousness, the influence of righteousness, the influences of righteousness, the influence of righteousness, the emanator of righteousness, the emanators of righteousness, the emanator of righteousness, the emanation of righteousness, the emanations of righteousness, the emanation of righteousness, the converger of righteousness, the convergers of righteousness, the converger of righteousness, the convergence of righteousness, the convergences of righteousness, the convergence of righteousness, the aura of righteousness, the auras of righteousness, the aura of righteousness, the impression of righteousness, the impressions of righteousness, the impression of righteousness, the intelligence of righteousness, the intelligences of righteousness, the intelligence of righteousness, the sophistication of righteousness, the sophistications of righteousness, the sophistication of righteousness, the genius of righteousness, the geniuses of righteousness, the genius of righteousness, the polymath of righteousness, the polymaths of righteousness, the polymath of righteousness, the psychic of righteousness, the psychics of righteousness, the psychic of righteousness, the knowledge of righteousness, the knowledges of righteousness, the knowledge of righteousness, the understanding of righteousness, the understandings of righteousness, the understanding of righteousness, the wisdom of righteousness, the wisdoms of righteousness, the wisdom of righteousness, the secret of righteousness, the secrets of righteousness, the secret of righteousness, the mystery of righteousness, the mysteries of righteousness, the mystery of righteousness, the revelation of righteousness, the revelations of righteousness, the revelation of righteousness, the tactic of righteousness, the tactics of righteousness, the tactic of righteousness, the strategy of righteousness, the strategies of righteousness, the strategy of righteousness, the strength of righteousness, the strengths of righteousness, the strength of righteousness, the might of righteousness, the mights of righteousness, the might of righteousness, the power of righteousness, the powers of righteousness, the power of righteousness, the authority of righteousness, the authorities of righteousness, the authority of righteousness, the dominion of righteousness, the dominions of righteousness, the dominion of righteousness, the rhythm of righteousness, the rhythms of righteousness, the rhythm of righteousness, the melody of righteousness, the melodies of righteousness, the melody of righteousness, the music of righteousness, the musics of righteousness, the music of righteousness, the lyric of righteousness, the lyrics of righteousness, the lyric of righteousness, the song of righteousness, the songs of righteousness, the song of righteousness, the dance of righteousness, the dances of righteousness, the dance of righteousness, the spirit of righteousness, the spirits of righteousness, the spirit of righteousness, the soul of righteousness, the souls of righteousness, the soul of righteousness, the body of righteousness, the bodies of righteousness, the body of righteousness, the mark of righteousness, the marks of righteousness, the mark of righteousness, The promise of righteousness. The promises of righteousness. The promise of righteousness. The visionary of righteousness. The visionaries of righteousness. The visionary of righteousness. The vision of righteousness. The visions of righteousness. The vision of righteousness. The picture of righteousness. The pictures of righteousness. The picture of righteousness. The sound of righteousness. The sounds of righteousness. The sound of righteousness. The tongue of righteousness. The tongues of righteousness. The tongue of righteousness. The language of righteousness. The languages of righteousness. The language of righteousness. The communication of righteousness. The communications of righteousness. The communication of righteousness. The people of righteousness. The peoples of righteousness. The people of righteousness. The society of righteousness. The societies of righteousness. The society of righteousness. The fortress of righteousness. The fortresses of righteousness. The fortress of righteousness. The government of righteousness. The governments of righteousness. The government of righteousness. The city of righteousness. The cities of righteousness. The city of righteousness. The nation of righteousness. The nations of righteousness. The nation of righteousness. The civilization of righteousness. The civilizations of righteousness. The civilization of righteousness. The world of righteousness. The worlds of righteousness. The world of righteousness.